Cleaning and lubing your e-mountain bike is key to getting it to run as efficiently as possible. But efficiency aside, it's also going to make those parts last a lot longer on your bike too, and in general just make it run a lot sweeter too. So in today's video we're going to take a look at all the lubes and cleaners you need to keep on top of running your e-mountain bike. Okay, so before we kick things off, let's take a look at the areas on the bike that you should and should not be adding lube to. And first up, I want to talk about fork stanchions. Now, fork stanchion is a great place to be adding something like the silicone shine. Now, silicone shine is going to make the surface super slippy and get that fork acting really supple. And another bonus part about using silicone shine is that it can actually get into the fork seals and pull some of that grime up as well. So you simply wipe that off with a towel and you've got a clean and slick working fork. Of course, don't go too overboard on this because you don't want that lube to travel down the fork leg and possibly contaminate that front brake. And talking of brakes, the only thing that should ever touch your brake surfaces is going to be water or brake cleaner. Now, brake cleaner just removes all that dust and grime from your rotors. You just need to go super careful around this area. Don't even think about lubing up your disc brakes because they're squeaking. Anything like that is just going to contaminate those discs. Next up is going to be your chain. Now, this is the only area on a bike that you should be applying a fair amount of lube to. A clean and well lubricated chain will exceed the life of an ill-maintained one by a long, long way. Then there is the rear shock. Now, this is another area that can benefit from some silicone shine. Again, it's going to make that shock surface super slick and pull any of that debris that's built up around those wiper seals. So giving it a squirt on the rear shock is definitely not going to be a problem. Now, the rest of your bike will have sealed cartridge bearings that are pre-lubed from the factory, so you don't need to actually get in there and add any lube to these. If you do add lube to these areas, such as your cartridge bearings in your wheels or your headset externally, then all you're going to be doing is attracting dust to that area, and therefore you could trap moisture in there. It's just pretty much going to be a tacky surface that is going to attract dust and grime. It's something you definitely should not be doing. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the areas that I do use lube on. Does the motor need any lube? Well, no, that's a pre-sealed factory lubricated unit that shouldn't need any maintenance whatsoever. So don't go sticking any oil or lube into that motor. It definitely doesn't need it. First up, so lube for the chain. Obviously, that's pretty simple. That's just going to go on the chain to keep it lubricated. Grease. Now, this is great for when you're building that bike up, maybe sticking some inside of your seat post area, on the wheel axles. You can, of course, use them on the different threads on your bike, like for installing pedals, areas like that. That's the main areas that we're going to be using grease for. Then there is Degreaser. Now, this comes in different forms. You can use it as a spray or a bottle or a chain bath. Now, this is used for cleaning that chain and cassette to make it last a lot longer and removing all of that grime. Water Displacer and Corrosion Protect is great to add to that list too. Water Displacer, as it says on the tin, is just going to drive all those water out of those hard to reach places, such as the motor, the battery, and of course your switch units on your handlebars and maybe top tube too. Corrosion Protect, well, that does exactly what it says on the tin too. Protects your bike from corrosion, particularly on areas such as battery contacts and areas around the motor and other electrical components too. So you may be asking the question, why do we actually need bike-specific lubes and cleaners for our bikes when you've got that perfectly good can of car oil up on your garage shelf that you could be adding to your chain? Well, bike lubes are designed for the job in hand. Take this dry weather lube, for example. Now this, if you apply it to the chain, it's designed to penetrate those rollers really good. And with a dry lube, that is actually going to evaporate after a while. So it's going to leave your chain protected and lubed, but it won't leave a sticky chain. Now, if you go add in that car engine oil to your chain, one, it's going to be super sticky, is not going to penetrate the rollers properly, is not going to have the right lubes in it. All it will do is create a black sticky mess that's going to leave big marks on the inside of your calf muscle. It's going to destroy your chain and it will pick up every single bit of sand and dust and mud along the way, and therefore enhance that chain and whole drivetrain wear a lot more than a proper lube. It makes your life a lot easier, a lot cleaner by using the right stuff. Okay, so let's take a look at the different lubes and cleaners that I use to keep my e-mountain bike looking fresh and working super efficiently too. First up, I want to talk about degreasing. Now, this is great for taking that old grime and old lube off your chain to making sure it is nice and clean and working as efficiently as possible. Comes in lots of different formats. You can have spray bottles, aerosol cans, or you can just get liquid which you can pour into a chain bath. They all do an amazing job at pulling that gunk off the chain and making it work really well. Water displacer. Now, once you wash your e-mountain bike, it is critical to make sure it is dry too. Now, water displacer is just going to drive all that water out of those hard to reach areas. Now, a lot of this water dispersing spray is actually 2-in-1. So you kind of get a protective layer and sometimes lube left by this. So it is kind of doing two things in one. Now, if you apply this to your bike, next time water hits that area, it's got a protective layer on it and that water is simply gonna fall off. So just make sure you've driven all that water out by using a water dispersing spray. A general purpose grease such as this is great for having in your workshop too. Now, you might not be really into your maintenance, but you will be doing basic things such as removing pedals from your bike or removing the wheel axles too. Now, if you add a little bit of grease to your wheel axle, it's just going to make that installation and removal process a lot easier. And you won't get to the trail and sometimes find that your axle is jammed into your fork, something like that. And as I mentioned, the pedals, adding a bit of grease to them just aids all that removal process when it comes to whipping those pedals off. And basic things such as installing bearings on your bike too can be made a lot easier if you use a little bit of grease on them. Now, carbon gripper. Now, this might seem a little bit of an odd one to some of you, especially if you don't have carbon parts on your bike, but carbon requires careful calibration of the right torque figures to make sure that those components are nipped up, but not too tight. Now, sometimes these can slip, but if you add a little bit of carbon gripper into the mix on those mating surfaces, it will make that bond a lot better and you won't feel those components slipping. Basically like a kind of a friction paste. So if you've got slipping occurring on your bike on those carbon components, get some carbon gripper into the mix and I can assure you it is great stuff. Silicone spray is great if used in the right places, and the right places for this stuff is going to be in those areas that you want to shine and slide. So areas such as the rear shock shaft or your fork stanchions. It's going to make that surface super slippery and really slick, and it can pull some of that debris out the seals too. When it comes to spraying on your bike, yes, you can use this on your frame. It's going to make that frame really nice and shiny and add a protective layer on there, meaning that when you hit the mud, next is not going to stick onto your bike. It will simply fall off. And as great as this stuff is, just make sure you don't get it near your disc brakes. Disc brake cleaner. Now, this stuff is really great at removing all that gunk and buildup that you're going to get on your brake rotors. Now, this will restore some of that brake's power and can get rid of some of those horrible squeals that you can associate when it comes to braking. Now, this stuff's really great at removing all that gunk from your rotors and the mud that can sometimes build up in the little vents as well. So in turn, this stuff will actually make your brake pads last a lot longer whilst restoring some of that braking power. So get some disc brake cleaner on the go and restore that braking power. Dry lube for your chain. Now, this is really low viscosity and it isn't very sticky at all. In fact, once you apply this to your lube, it will evaporate and leave your chain lubed but not sticky. So that's obviously great for not attracting that dust to your chain and therefore getting all that into your drivetrain system. But if you use this in the wrong conditions, such as rainy or wet rides, it will simply wash off pretty quickly, leaving that chain unprotected. Then there is wet lube. Now, this stuff, as you guessed it, is for riding in wet conditions. Now, in the wet, your chain is subjected to a lot of harsh conditions. You mean you've got puddles, stream crossings, and of course that torrential rain. So making sure you've got a lube on your chain that is not going to wash off and keep that chain lubed throughout those horrible conditions is definitely essential. Now, if you run wet lube in dry conditions, all it's going to do is attract all that dust and gunk to your chain. It will become super sticky and create just a grinding paste on your chain. So making sure you've got the right lubes to suit the conditions that you're riding in is definitely super important. Now, whilst we're on the subject of lubing your chain, something you might want to look at is also chain wax. Now, we hear great results of some riders using this stuff. Basically, it's a tub of wax that you melt down on your hob or your oven at home, dunk your chain in once it's all been cleaned and let that wax penetrate. So if you're looking for some good results too, that could be worth a shout. Corrosion defense spray. Now this is really good stuff, and rust on any bike isn't good, particularly on an e-bike. If you are getting rust in some of those areas such as electrical components, you are going to suffer from bad contacts. Now that electricity won't get passed from one piece to the next, and therefore your bike won't work. So getting some of this on the go is going to break down that rust and prevent it from ever happening in the first place. So get in there with this around your batteries and those electrical components. It is great stuff. Now, a great product that I've seen crossing over from the motorcycle and car industry is Dielectric Grease. Now, if you're into really protecting the electrics on your bike, this stuff is definitely worth a look. It's just going to protect those components from the dreaded moisture, ingress, and of course corrosion too. Now, it isn't actually a conductive grease, so you shouldn't use it on any areas such as the battery contacts, but what it will do is provide that great seal and prevent any nastiness getting into those areas. Now, if there ever was a product designed for e-mountain bikes in mind for cleaning them, this would definitely be the one. Now, this is called a waterless wash. So the idea of this stuff is that you don't actually need any water by means of a pressure washer or a hose pipe to be added to your e-mountain bike. As we know, water can cause problems. So using this stuff is really good if your bike's lightly soiled from a ride. Squirt it on, let it do its stuff and wipe it off. It's going to leave your bike looking super slick and super clean without all that added water. And last on my list is going to be some bike protection spray too. This is great stuff for adding a bit of a final shine to your bike and adding a protective layer too. This stuff will stop moisture building up and obviously drive out water. And it's also going to add a protective layer to your bike. So next time you go out in some foul conditions, the mud is simply going to fall off your bike and the water is going to collect, bead up and simply run off, so you're going to get no water build-up too. If I am using this stuff on my bike, I like to apply it to a cloth, then add it to my bike. If I spray it on, I'm always worried that could drift onto my brakes, therefore making them contaminated. And as we know, contaminated brakes definitely are not good. But that's a little insight to all the lubes and cleaners that I use on my e-mountain bike to keep it running fresh and looking fresh too. But get involved in the comments box down below if you've got any products I've missed out that help you out loads too. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed today's video. Make sure you subscribe to us here on EMBN. And whilst you're there subscribing, check out the merch shop too. We've got loads of new product in there too. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.